Shalom. Welcome to our next lesson in our online school of Biblical and Jewish Studies. This has to do with the nation of Israel. And specifically, we are going to be looking at understanding the Israel and Palestinian issue. Much is in the news about this in the time that we live, and much of what we receive is void of any historical basis and understanding. We have to go back in history to understand what's happening today. So we're going to first go back some 1900 years roughly to the Second Jewish Revolt from 132 to 135 AD. Now, the first Jewish revolt, you may be more familiar with that, 70 AD when Israel was destroyed. Started earlier in 66 AD. And ultimately the Romans, and under the leadership of General Titus, would destroy Jerusalem and Israel, the temple as well. Well, a number of years later, some 40 years, actually some 60 years later, we have what is referred to as the Second Jewish Revolt. It's also referred to as the Bar Kokhba uprising. Bar Kokhba was a Jewish man who claimed to be the Messiah. And numbers of leading rabbis agreed that he was the Messiah. And he led a revolt against Rome. Now, what ended up happening is that Bar Kokhba was killed at the Battle of Betar. The revolt was put down. And Hadrian, the destruction of Jerusalem was fully complete at this point. And Hadrian, the emperor of Rome, wanting to get rid of every vestige of Jewishness from that area, he changed the name of Jerusalem to Aelia Capitolina, and the name of Israel to Palestina, or Palestine. And that's how that word originated, with the destruction of that nation again in 135 AD in the Second Jewish Revolt. As Hadrian, that Roman emperor, brought that name into the vocabulary of the world. Well, Israel, and Jerusalem in particular, from that point, 135 AD, up until 1516 AD, was constantly being captured and then razed and then captured again by another force. And this was repeated over and over again. In 313 AD, the Byzantine, the Roman rule of Jerusalem, was happening. But some 300 years later, in 614 AD, the Persians would take control of the city of Jerusalem. When you controlled Jerusalem, you controlled, if there was a nation at the time, the whole nation, but that area. In 629 AD, Emperor Heraclius restored Byzantine rule to Jerusalem. Some 9 years later, 10 years later, in 638 AD, Jerusalem would be captured by Caliph Omar ibn al-Khattab. This was 6 years after Muhammad's death. In 878, the Egyptian Ahmad ibn Tulun would capture Jerusalem. In 905, Jerusalem would return to Abbasid rule. And then later on in that century, in 941 AD, Jerusalem would be captured by Egypt. Well, the story continues. In 1071, an army of Turkish mercenaries, the Seljuks, captured Jerusalem. In 1099, the Crusaders, following Pope Urban II's call, conquer Jerusalem. In 1187, that Muslim military and political leader Saladin would capture the city of Jerusalem. 1229, the Crusaders again get control of Jerusalem. 1244, the Turks would conquer Jerusalem for the first time. In 1260, the Mongolian chief Hulagu Khan captured Jerusalem, very brief period, because that same year the Mamluks captured Jerusalem. And then in 1516, Sultan Selim I of Turkey captures the city of Jerusalem. And this would start the 4 centuries of Turkish or Ottoman rule. From 1516 to 1916 AD, the Middle East was under the control of the Ottoman, the Turkish Empire, until the end of World War I. Now that's a brief overview of that area of the world, and specifically what the world refers to as Palestine today, and Jerusalem as the most important city in that area. But these 400 years are important. What would end up happening is the Ottoman Empire would join the Axis forces in World War I, and ultimately losing. There would be given a mandate to Britain and France, we'll look at that in the series of lessons, to divide up the old Ottoman Empire. But before we proceed to that, there's something we need to understand about the Arab understanding of that area of the world, what is today called, by many, Palestine. The Focus on Jerusalem library, there's an article by Elliot Green. It was titled, "The Name Rome Gave the Land of Israel." And he said this: "The Arab treatment of geographical names after their conquest of the country, 635 to 640 CE, in this era, was paradoxical. The Quran mentions the Holy Land divinely assigned to the people of Israel. That's in Surah, and verses 5 and 12 and 20 and 21. However," Green goes on, "the Arabs later on did not see this land as a separate country. They typically considered the country merely an undifferentiated part of Bilad Asham, which is usually translated as Syria or Greater Syria. This view, that Palestine was just part of Syria, Greater Syria, lasted until the end of the British Mandate period, which was 1948. He goes on, "As we see from Arab writings and political declarations, such as Arab testimony before the Anglo-American Commission of Inquiry on Palestine in 1946. Now, what is important in what he writes is that for centuries after the name change of Israel to Palestina or Palestine by the Romans, the Arab world looked at that area as part of Greater Syria, or just Syria. They didn't look at it as an independent entity, as an independent nation state. In fact, there has never been a Palestinian nation state. There's never, in fact, been a Palestinian people of Arab descent. The change of the name of Israel by Rome to Palestina or Palestine has influenced both the political and the religious world. In the geopolitical arena, it has impacted the world's view of the land of Palestine and the people of Palestine, especially with the birth of the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, in 1964, and their extremely effective propaganda campaign that has miscolored the understanding of the Israel-Palestinian conflict. It's had an immense impact in the geopolitical arena, but as well in the religious world. It has caused confusion with the adoption of the land covenant given to Abraham. Remember back in Genesis chapter 12:1 that God had promised to the descendants of Abraham, and then the descendants of Isaac, and the descendants of Jacob. In other words, the Jewish people, the right to the land, an unconditional, eternal right to the land. And that portion of the Abrahamic covenant, which is expanded on in Deuteronomy 30, is a land covenant. But religious schools, Bible schools, started to refer to that covenant as the Palestinian covenant. Certainly in our world today, that language at best causes confusion about that promised land to the Jewish people. At worst, communicates that that land belongs to the Palestinian people spoken of as the Arabs today. Much confusion with that name change. We're going to look in depth, fairly in depth, at the question, the issue of the Israeli-Palestinian people and what's taking place to this very day. I think you'll learn a lot and understand in a much more pointed way exactly what is happening in the world in relation to Israel and the Palestinians. At the very end, the last lesson, we will briefly look at what some of the prophetic implications of this are. Well, until next time, shalom.